strips and I'm ready for the next step. So you saw me serging all of these. You might be wondering, is it really necessary to spend all that time serging all the edges? Yes, unfortunately it is, because with hand-woven fabric, and especially this turned tackete weave, it is a little bit more open, and so as soon as you cut it, there is movement with the fabric. It also has a little bit of elasticity, and that contributes to the movement. So let's just have a look here. I'm trying to show you how, yeah, here we go. How some of the fibers start to come away quite readily. And we don't want that, do we, for a quilt? Definitely not. So if I sewed all of my pieces together, all of my blocks together, there is a chance that they would start to unravel at the seams eventually. Not only that, but as I said, there's a bit of movement. Like this fabric, with its thickness, with its design, a little bit of elasticity, there is that kind of movement. So by cutting them and then straight away serging them, I'm keeping those pieces as I cut them. Now, I made a big mistake and I'm not afraid to share it. What I did was, well, I had planned to do 7-inch blocks. And you know how they always say, measure twice, cut once? I measured twice and I cut once, and then I measured again and found that I had cut 5 inches instead of 7. How does this happen? I don't know. I'm not really sure, but something happened in here and we went off plan a little bit, but that's okay. I don't mind working with mistakes. So I just cut that first row of 5 inches instead of 7. So then I had a decision to make. Am I going to continue to cut the rest of the rows 5 inches, or am I going to discard this row, this strip of 5 inches and do the rest 7? And I decided to go with the 5 because I didn't want to waste this strip of fabric. I want to be able to use as much of this fabric as I possibly can. So for the circle section that I've cut out into strips, this is what I had left over. It's about a 2-inch strip, which is not bad. And I can use that in something else. I need to serge that, but that will be serged and it'll probably go into my samples box. I'll either keep it as a sample or I'll end up using it in some other sewing project, and that's okay. All right, so what I've got here is a bunch of strips that are 5 inches width. I serged them, I pressed them. I did need to press them because, again, the movement, serging along the edges can sort of gather the fabric very, very slightly. Gather is probably not the right word, but it wasn't laying flat anymore, and I want it to lay flat for the next step. And the next step is that now that I've got 5 inches width, I want to have 5 inches length as well. So these are all going to get cut into 5-inch squares, and then I'm going to serge the raw edges of those new squares again. So you might be able to tell so far this is not a quick process working with hand-woven fabric. You've got to go to those extra measures to secure the fabric. But I am almost 100% sure that it's going to be totally worth it. happy to say that we do now have some quilt blocks. I'll show those to you in a moment, but I'll also tell you a little bit about what my process has been so far, and not the mistakes that I've made, but the way that I've found things to do a little bit better. So my initial idea was to cut up the circle fabric and make little squares, which I have done with quite a few of them. And then of course I had to serge or overlock around all the edges of those squares. My idea with this was that I knew I had the coordinating fabrics, like the solid fabrics like this one, but I didn't know what kind of arrangement that I wanted to do them in. I wanted to do them in a kind of 4-patch style, so each block would have 4 of these squares, but each square would be different. But I wasn't sure of the layout of that. So my idea was to make a bunch of squares of each of the fabrics and then kind of lay them all out on my big cutting table here and see what I liked. Only thing with that is, became really tedious cutting out these little squares and then overlocking every single side. Way too tedious for me. So I'm still going to use these little squares, of course, but I have found a better way to do things, and that is to sew strips together. So I've cut out 5-inch widths of each strip, so it's 5 inches this way, and then just the length of the fabric, which is why these two fabrics are different sizes, because this is one warp at the top and the bottom warp is a different warp. But so I've cut out the strips. Let me see if I can find one strip on its own. Here we go. So this is some of the squares. Cut out a strip like this, overlock the raw edges, or serge the raw edges. Overlockers and serges are the same thing, it's just different terminology for different countries. So if you're in the UK or Australia or New Zealand, you probably talk about overlockers. If you're in the US or other European countries, you probably talk about serges. It's just different language. So if I use those terms interchangeably, don't worry, they mean the same thing. So once those edges are serged, and I don't need to serge the short edges because they're the edges of the warp, so they're secure already. And then I would just take my next piece of fabric, whatever that was going to be. At the moment I've been pairing solids with the patterns, and that one also would be serged on the edges. And then I'd just sew them together, right sides facing together. And then once that's done, I can open them up and I get this. Now this is the back. I have those edges already finished, which is so much easier than cutting out little squares and then going around all those 4 edges with the serger, which is just tedious and a pain and not very enjoyable. And so from this point, I then cut 5-inch lengths of this. So I'd measure 5 inches along here and I'd cut that, and I cut as many as the fabric can make. Usually I get 3 out of a short length of fabric. And then from that point I have another piece like this but different colors or different pattern, and then I can do a little bit of mix and matching, which I have done here. So I can show you some of these blocks. Okay, so we've got 4 different looks there. This corner fabric here and this corner fabric here, they're the same fabric, but one of them is turned around so that you can see the back of it. And that's why you can see dark circles up here and colored circles down here. So that's a big bonus of that type of fabric, is when it's reversible but a little bit different but totally cohesive on the opposite side. So if I turn this around, you can see all of my serged parts there. So I'm taking 2 rows, these ones sewn together and these ones sewn together, and then I'm sewing them together at the back, and then I get my little 4-patch. And most of my 4 patches are the same at the moment, but once I start making little 4 patches out of this and something else as well, then obviously I'm going to get a lot of different blocks. And I'm still going by the same idea that I don't know my exact layout. I don't know exactly how much fabric I'm going to have once I've got all of my blocks. I am very certain at this point that I am going to have to weave more fabric to do a complete quilt, but exactly how that's going to look, like how I'll incorporate that, I'm not sure. My one idea is to lay out blocks, the 4-patch blocks, and then have like a sashing in between those blocks, like you can see here. Or another option could be to actually sew all those blocks together in various configurations for the main top of the quilt, and then to have sashing all down the sides. So that's another option as well, but yes, is going to involve me weaving some more fabric. Probably I think I would weave something a little bit similar to one of these, just a plain weave with incorporating some of the colours that I've used in the main quilt blocks. But what I found with doing this plain weave warp on my floor loom is it was just so fast to thread and weave that it's not really daunting, the idea of having to weave more fabric in order to finish this. And then over here I've got, besides the few solid colours that I've got, I also have this zigzag fabric, and I'm going to try and incorporate that somehow. That could be a little bit tricky because there's only a piece this big. So it's kind of a smaller piece than a lot of the other pieces that I have. And so that's one challenge, is to, when you've got a different piece of fabric and that's going to make a different quilt block, how to kind of incorporate that into what I've already got without it looking wrong. But that remains to be seen. So at this stage, I'm going to continue making these blocks in the different fabrics that I have and combining them in different ways to make these, continue making these 4-patch, and basically do that with all the fabric that I've woven and see how that goes. See what I've actually got once they are all done. And I'll have all of these 4-patch blocks laid out, but I won't sew them together until I know what I'm going to do, or until I know how much more fabric I'm going to need. And then I can get a little bit more specific about it and say, okay, I'm going to do the sashing in between, or I'm going to do the sashing at the sides. Whatever I end up doing, that will be able to tell me, because once I've got all the blocks done and laid out, I'll see exactly how much fabric that I've got and how much I'll lose by seam allowances, by seaming them together and all of that. But so far it's going really great, and I'm really happy with what I've got. I need your help desperately. I'm actually pretty excited at the moment because I've got most of my blocks laid out. Some of these are not quite joined yet, but most of them are joined into these blocks of 4. And the others, I haven't joined them yet, but I just wanted to lay them out to see how they looked. And after deliberating over this for so long, and I've actually had a break from this for a couple of months, not because I didn't want to do it, just family stuff happening, and I had to have some time away as well. Now I'm back at it. And so yeah, I was deliberating over exactly where to put the blocks, the placement. And I just came in here today and I had sewn up some extra blocks yesterday, and I just laid them all out, and I'm like, yeah, that's how it's going to be. That's good. I like it. I'm happy. It doesn't have to be like necessarily a repeating pattern. I'm good with that. I'm also good with the fact that my seams aren't straight and that my blocks don't meet in the middle and all of that stuff. It's all good. I'm fine with it. So I'm sorry if you're a quilter and you're absolutely cringing inside. But I do want your advice, please. I cannot decide what to do next. There are 2 options. I am going to weave some more fabric. That's definitely going to happen. And I'll probably weave it in, I don't know, probably a dark blue, like a navy, similar to the dark spots here. Maybe with a pink or a blue weft, probably blue, but I haven't decided on that yet. But it's going to be a solid fabric like this, okay? Here's what I can't decide on. I'm happy with the size of this quilt top so far, but it does need a little bit extra on the length and a little bit extra on the width. So tell me what you think. Option 1 is to put the plain weave fabric as sashings all around the quilt top as I've got it at the moment. So sew these blocks together just as they are, but put like a thick sashing before I do the binding and all of that as part of the quilt top. So how thick that would be is, I'm not really sure, probably 8 to 10 inches wide all around the border of this as it appears now. Option 2 is to separate these quilt blocks roughly like this, to have the sashing around the outside, but also to have sashing running through vertically and horizontally, because I think it would look weird if it was only vertical. So how would I do that? I would either separate out each of these and have the sashing running through them, or I'd have two together like that and have the sashing in between those. But then that would leave me one block at the end. So that wouldn't work. It would have to be through every block. There would have to be a sashing running. Whatever width that would be, I wouldn't want it as wide as the sides, because otherwise we're just getting bigger and bigger and more fabric. Those are the two options. Now I'm going to leave it over to you, and I hope that someone with some wisdom and an eye for detail can tell me what's going to be more suitable, what you think will look better.